Jacinda Ardern.
Mr Speaker, I think the message is clear this afternoon. If anyone wants to witness how out of touch this government is, they need merely watch the general debate on a Wednesday, because when they tune in, they won't hear a discussion about the $16 billion deficit. They won't hear the government's plan to deal with rising unemployment. They won't hear any discussion about inequality levels or the increasing cost of living. Instead, no, they'll hear Anne Tolley make jokes about postcards, Phil Heatley try and make jokes about hobbits, and then they'll hear backbench open mic night via Simon Bridges. I have no idea what that was. I'm sure the people who were watching, unfortunately, had no idea what that was. But I think there's a much bigger issue, Mr Speaker, and I don't want to allow myself to be distracted by Mr Bridges' speech. Instead, I would rather come back to the point that this week in the House we had an acknowledgement from the Minister of Labour that living on the minimum wage in this country is very, very difficult. She in fact talked about the tight budgets that many of those living on the minimum wage are experiencing. I would say, though, that the use of the word tight budget almost implies that there is some choice for householders, whereas when the Honourable Annette King rose to give her contribution, she talked about the stark choices that people are making. Fix a broken tooth or eat. Those are the kinds of choices that Kiwis are currently making. That's not just a tight budget. And now, Mr Speaker, living on the minimum wage has become a lot harder under this government. Not only are we seeing an increase in prices of almost 5%, we're seeing increases in ACC, an increase in rent per week of almost 32% over the past 3 years. For university students, an increase in studying of 16%. And we're seeing the impact this is having on young people. Student hardship grants have increased by 423% over the past few years. 423%. Much of that down to an increase in the cost of food for those students who are struggling to survive. So I ask the Minister this. If the Minister of Labour acknowledges that living on the minimum wage is hard, how hard will it be for a young person to live on a youth minimum wage? How hard will it be for a young person to live on less than what all Kiwis on the minimum wage are currently surviving on? Because currently the government is considering, it has acknowledged that it is considering the option of a youth minimum wage. This is apparently part of its cogent plan on jobs. I think it probably speaks more to the point that everything they've done thus far hasn't had the impact required to bring down record high levels of youth unemployment, 27%. Well, Labour says paying young people less is not the answer. In fact, our response is that it's a cop-out. It's an acknowledgement that they don't have the answers, that the government doesn't have a plan to create jobs, and that the only option they have now is to try and pay young people less to switch around the unemployment issue. Now, the fact that the Minister has openly stated that a young person being paid less would mean that an employer might be more inclined to employ them over, say, a 30-year-old is an acknowledgement that this potentially will just shift the unemployment issue from one age group to another. How does that overall help New Zealand and Kiwis who are out of jobs and looking for work? It doesn't. I'd be happy for any member on that side of the House to explain to me how youth wage rates bring down unemployment across the board. Any evidence whatsoever? Because I have some evidence I'd like to present to the government. It's a cold, hard fact that the lowest levels of youth unemployment were achieved under the last Labour government, and it was after youth wage rates were abolished. Youth wage rates have absolutely nothing to do with it. In fact, we have evidence to suggest that there is no robust correlation between youth wage rates and youth unemployment from the Department of Labour. In fact, the 1990s, as members will well remember when they were last in government, were the last time that youth unemployment was this high. We had youth wage rates. It's time the government acknowledges it's out of ideas, and this will not help young people.
Todd McLeay.